Tibetan Buddhist Paul Levy. What we believe to be the real world is not as it is, but as we are. The stories we tell ourselves, the ones we tell ourselves about ourselves. What are yours? The ones others tell, or our cultures have to say about who we are. What are theirs? Those we wear like clothes, or costumes, uniforms, armor, or disguises. Unlike the storyless places deep within that can only be sensed, quietly sussed, the essence and consciousness of the being that is you, that simply is, free of all words, all definitions, all interpretations. Imagine the liberation, the revelation of stepping out of your overstoried life, stripping down to the pith and marrow, the bones of the unstoried house of your life, unwrapping the narratives that kept you from seeing, kept you from knowing and embracing yourself, outside all the lines, outside all the telling. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to show 202, coming to you live from the story-laden coast of Rhode Island, and this second day of spring in New England. This is your poet, illuminator, and guiding spirit in the poetosphere, Colin Goedecke, a voice here and elsewhere for living our days more fully, more alively, more poetically. Last week's broadcast was heading south, the settings, feelings, and pulls or pleasures of places and people in, and ideas and stories about southern climes, ones we travel to, maybe live in now or in the past, maybe wonder about, or well remember, wherever in the world they are, from the American South to South America, the south of France, the South Pole, the South Pacific. Or at home, musing on it, or getting some literal southern exposure. This week, it's the stories we tell ourselves, about ourselves, our lives, storifying that comes naturally, though sometimes overlays or obscures our essential nature, our essence, our simple beingness, or the essence of others, and how we could do well to see such stories as what they are, outer wrappings, and learn to discern the difference, the distinction between those narratives and who you really are, which can lead to a great liberation, yes, setting you free to live outside of old or cultural or other received or running narratives, some overt, some subtle, some entirely unserving, those that cloud our perceptions. This and the stories we do tell that greatly support, encourage, and inspire us. They matter. I was inspired to make this broadcast as the result of a very recent, deeper, well-dweller conversation I was having in the poetosphere with a man who teaches and writes about this, and has for some time, who has helped many people arrive at a significant aha moment and a shift of consciousness and a deeper awareness and experience of themselves and the world. What, as he said, could be more fruitful an exploration than cutting through all the outer layers to knowing our truest, our essential selves? Well, I have a short clip of him for you to hear, all of us to hear as we go, in a little bit. Meanwhile, I've curated a whole show of cultural commentary and poetry, quotes, anecdotes, and inquiry around this theme, and a mix of sharings as well from various listeners, followers, and friends that I invited thoughts from. So let's go. Let's go together into our own and others' story territory and see what we discover, what we realize, maybe recover of our root beings and becomings. Let's begin with a song of being. It's by the Native American poet N. Scott Momaday. The Delight Song of Tis-o-ai Tali. I am a feather on the bright sky. I am the blue horse that runs in the plain. I am the fish that rolls, shining in the water. I am the shadow that follows a child. I am the evening light, the luster of meadows. I am an eagle playing with the wind. I am a cluster of bright beads. I am the farthest star. I am the cold of dawn. I am the roaring of the rain. I am the glitter on the crust of the snow. I am the long track of the moon in a lake. I am a flame of 4 colors. I am a deer standing away in the dusk. I am a field of sumac in the palme blanche. I am an angle of geese in the winter sky. I am the hunger of a young wolf. I am the whole dream of these things. You see, I am alive. I am alive. I stand in good relation to the earth. I stand in good relation to the gods. I stand in good relation to all that is beautiful. I stand in good relation to the daughter of Tsen Tayinte. You see, I am alive. I am alive. Namaste. And Scott Momaday passed away recently. Quite a figure. Jessica Greenbaum, For a Traveler. I only have a moment, so let me tell you the shortest story about arriving at a long-loved place, the House of Friends in Maine. Their lawn of wildflowers, their grandfather clock and candid portraits, their gabled attic rooms, and wood stove in the kitchen, all accessories of the genuine summer years before, when I was their son's girlfriend and tied an apron behind my neck, beneath my braids, and took from their garden the harvest for a dinner I would make alone and serve at their big table with the gladness of the found and loved. The eggplant shone like polished wood. The tomatoes smelled like their furred collars. The dozen zucchini lined up on the counter like placid troops with the onions, their minions. And I even remember the garlic, each clove from its airmail envelope brought to the cutting board, ready for my instruction. And in this very slight story, a decade later, I came by myself, having been dropped by the airport cab, and waited for the family to arrive home from work. I walked into the lawn, waist-high in the swaying purple lupins, the subject of June's afternoon light as I had never been addressed, a displaced young woman with cropped hair, no place to which I wished to return, and no one to gather me in his arms. That day the lupins received me, and I was in love with them, because they were all I had left. And in that same manner I have loved much of the world since then. And who is to say there is more of a reason, or more to love? Thank you, Jessica Greenbaum, For a Traveler. Naomi Shihab Nye, the story around the corner, is not turning the way you thought it would turn, gently, in a little spiral loop, the way a child draws the tail of a pig. What came out of your mouth, a riff of common talk. As a sudden weather shift on a beach, sky looming, mountains of cloud in a way you cannot predict or guide, the story shuffles elements, darkens, takes its own side. And it is strange. Far more complicated than a few phrases pieced together around a kitchen table on a July morning in Dallas, say, a city you don't live in, where people might shop forever or throw 1,000 stories away. You, who carried or told a tiny bit of it, aren't sure. Is this what we wanted? Stories wandering out, having their own free lives? Maybe they are planning something bad. A scrap or cell of talk you barely remember is growing into a weird body with many demands. One day soon it will stumble up the walk and knock hard, and you will have to answer the door. Thank you. Naomi Shihab Nye. That's from her collection, You and Yours. A few quotes. Author Jose Antonio Vargas. I think the hardest stories we tell are always the ones about ourselves. And as a journalist, I was taught that I'm never supposed to put myself in the story. So I spent, 11, 12 years of my life writing about other people so I don't have to face my own life. Neil Gaiman. I don't necessarily think stories have functions any more than diamonds have functions or the sky has a function. Stories exist. They keep us sane, I think. We tell each other stories. We believe stories. I love watching the slow rise of the urban legend. They're the stories that we use to explain ourselves to ourselves. And one more this is from Joan Didion from her book, The White Album. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. We look for the sermon in the suicide, for the social or moral lesson in the murder of 5. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of the multiple choices. We live entirely, especially if we are writers, by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images, by the, quote, ideas with which we have learned to freeze the shifting phantasmagoria which is our actual experience. Liesl Müller. Why we tell stories. Because we used to have leaves, and on damp days our muscles feel a tug, painful now, from when roots pulled us into the ground, and because our children believe they can fly, an instinct retained from when the bones in our arms were shaped like zithers and broke neatly under their feathers, and because before we had lungs, we knew how far it was to the bottom as we floated open-eyed like painted scarves past the scenery of dreams, and because we awakened and learned to speak. We sat by the fire in our caves, and because we were poor, we made up a tale about a treasure mountain that would open only for us. And because we were always defeated, we invented impossible riddles only we could solve, monsters only we could kill, women who could love no one else. And because we had survived, sisters and brothers, daughters and sons, we discovered bones that rose from the dark earth and sang as white birds in the trees. Because the story of our life becomes our life. Because each of us tells the same story but tells it differently, and none of us tells it the same way twice. Because grandmothers, looking like spiders, want to enchant the children, and grandfathers need to convince us what happened because of them. And though we listen only haphazardly, with one ear, we will begin our story with the word and. Thank you, Liesl Müller. All right, well, I mentioned the chap I was talking with, Mark Matusik. His site is Mark Matusik, Matousek.com. Worth a visit. But let me play this clip I have, a small excerpt from my recent deeper well-dweller conversation with him, with this teacher, author, mentor, seeker, and survivor, as he described himself to me. Let me cue that up. To ask you maybe to begin about transformation through the honest telling, expressing of our truths, of our true selves and stories, because I don't think I've had this kind of conversation yet with anyone more specifically. I mean, everyone's telling their stories of their lives and how they see the world and move through the world. But you're actually focused on this, in teaching this, or in helping people come to this and find their capacity for this. And I think in the times that we're in, I feel very clearly in the times that we're in, that the power of our stories and living them and telling them in a deeper, truer way is going to help transform the entire society from where we are to where we can go. And we used to do it, right? Back in the oral traditions of the day. Generations were doing it and sustaining something beautiful and important. So where do you see that happening, and what do you think about that possibility?
I think that it's a dream divinely to be wished, that we should come to a new narrative of why we're here, why we matter, where we're going. Mm. But I take a slightly different approach to storytelling, which is understanding that we are not our stories, that our stories don't actually define us.
Yes. We
And
have them,
that
in
we're
other words. We have stories, but right, they're not our identity, but they're part of our fabric.
exactly. I mean, I say that we're the storytellers, not the story. And when you remember that, then you're free to create all kinds of narratives. You're free to reinvent narratives, but you're not trapped inside this labeling narrative fallacy that most of us live our lives in. So understanding that we are not our circumstances, we're not the way we describe ourselves, that this composed identity isn't actually the essence of who we are, is enormously liberating. And it gives you a lot of freedom to explore your life stories, explore your life narratives without getting caught in them.
That's a crucial point you're making. This is very good because when we're quiet, meaning we're not speaking, we're in a place of, as you might be or I might be, for example, walking the beach solo, or it could be with someone, but just quietly in a sort of in a solitude, in a place of solitude, or and so when we're not and not thinking, so we're just moving through a landscape, or we're in a landscape, or in some setting where there's stillness, there's no mind, there's no story being told. We're just part of what it is.
Right.
And so it's interesting that you're bringing that up the way you did, because when you're in that place, the story has no hold, has no power, has no play. It's not you. You're just here. Yeah.
But you're no less alive. If
Oh no,
anything,
maybe you're more alive.
you're more alive because you're in touch with your being. You're in
Yeah.
touch with your own presence. And so much of storytelling can cover over our presence. It can cover over our essence. We're so busy explaining things to ourselves
Yes.
and creating plot lines and dramas and characters and devising outcomes that we forget about the flow of simply being alive and the experience of simply being here without naming,
Yes.
without labeling.
Yes.
So what I work with people to do is to move past the concepts of self, to touch into a deeper experience of being, which paradoxically gives us more imagination. It gives us more vitality, and we're able to use and move in and out of better stories that way.
Yes. All right. Well, there was much more. And for those listening who are in the members of the Poetosphere, that's there now, among 30 other and counting deeper well-dweller conversations of all kinds. And so if you're not a member and you'd like to just even dip in, you could certainly just become one for a month and see how you like it, what it gives you. All right, well, on we go, and thank you, Mark Matusik, for that. This is from the beautifultruth.org, the stories we tell ourselves. Which stories dictate our lives, and how can we change them? Every day we tell ourselves stories. As we go about our day, we piece together gaps in our knowledge, narrativizing a standoffish stare on the tube or an unanswered text from a friend with a self-crafted explanation. Storytelling occurs at our most basic experience of navigating the world, but most of the time, we aren't even aware of ourselves doing it. It takes conscious effort to experience the world without interpreting it, without cause and effect. We would wade through the world like zombies, only aware of the present as a tangle of sensory impressions, unable to make sense of anything. Philosopher Nassim Nicholas Taleb describes our instinctive need to bind A to B, to weave separate facts together with an explanation, as the narrative fallacy. There's an evolutionary root to such behavior. As science writer Michael Shermer explains in a TED Talk, we are, quote, pattern-seeking primates. If we hear a rustling in the grass, it's in our favor to associate the noise with the threat of a predator and run away. This is the root of associated learning. Our ability to connect the dots, to find meaningful patterns in the world, protects us from danger and maximizes our chances of survival. While our compulsion to fill in the gaps in our experience of the world enables us to make sense of it, can also cloud our vision. Our ingrained pattern-seeking faculties can cause us to become fixed in ingrained patterns of thinking, jumping to conclusions and misjudging character. Daniel Kahneman, Kahneman, who's quite, I've heard him speaking in other talks, like with Krista Tippett on Being. Incredible conversation. In his seminal book, Thinking Fast and Slow, quote, exaggerated emotional coherence is what he calls it. Once we form an opinion about a person, we're prone to judge other aspects of their character in light of this initial belief. It's because we are hardwired to look for evidence that bolster opinions we already have, rather than submit to the uncertainty admitted by new ideas. Ideas are sticky, he writes. Once we produce a theory, we're not likely to change our minds. If we find the political beliefs of a politician amiable, we're likely to also like his voice, hair, and manner. Yet once we're aware of our storytelling tendencies, we can use this to our advantage. The stories we tell ourselves provide an insight into our subconscious minds. When we reflect on these stories, we can learn more about ourselves, what our values are, what we view as meaningful and important. And here's the most exciting part. In realizing how prone we are to tell stories, and more importantly, to believe them, we're able to create new ones. And when we change the stories we tell ourselves, we can change the way we see the world and ourselves within it. Yes. Lisa Olstein, another story with a burning barn in it. I was on the porch pinching back the lobelia like trimming a great blue head of hair. We'd just planted the near field, the far one the day before. I'd never seen it so clear, so gusty, so overcast, so clear, so calm. They say pearls must be worn or they lose their luster, and that morning I happened to remember. So I put them on for milking, finding some sympathy, I guess, between the two. Usually I don't sit down until much later in the day. The lobelia was curling in the sun. One by one, birds flew off, and that should have been a sign. Trust is made and broken. I hardly sit down at all. It was the time of year for Luna moths, but we hadn't had any yet settling on the porch or hovering above the garden I'd let the wild roses take. Thank you, Lisa Olstein. That's from her collection, Radio Crackling, Radio Gone. New poet and poem for me, as were some of the others earlier. From literaryhub.com, Harold Johnson on how we tell our own stories. We are the stories we are told, and we are the stories we tell ourselves. Obviously, I'm turning the cube different ways about storytelling and these kinds of stories. But I liked what he had to say. Stories are not part of your culture. Your culture is story. It is entirely story. Everyone's is. We are all the stories we're told. Our being is story. Our essence, our vision is shaped by story. Our hearing, morals, ethics are all story. The wiring in our brains is shaped by it. Every thought you think is framed by story. I am story. You are story. The universe is story, and it all comes from the trickster. None of the stories we tell ourselves are true. We've made them up. It wasn't intentional. We simply inferred meaning into the experiences we encountered. Shortly after my birth, someone put a nipple in my mouth and squirted warm milk. At the same time, I heard sound. My brain connected the sound I was hearing with the taste of warm milk in my mouth. A neural pathway was created, and I inferred meaning to my experience. I connected the taste of my mother's milk with the sound of her voice. Her voice was a story that meant I was cared for. As I grew, I continued to infer meaning into my experiences, which he goes on about, but I'm not have that right now. Early on in life, I came to the conclusion that hard work was essential to my purpose. I allowed it to define who I was. Being a hard worker won me respect and accolades, which in turn reinforced my belief in the importance of hard work. It's only now, as an elder looking back, I can see how that faulty inference diminished my life. I spent too much time working and not enough time with my family. In real terms, I would have been much richer if I had not pursued economic wealth over mental, emotional, and spiritual wealth. If we cannot with certainty say that anything is absolutely true, then we are not bound to any single version of the story we inhabit. We're free to change our story, modify it, amend it, or completely rewrite it. We are free to adopt any story we choose. As Mark Matusik was talking about, echoing that. But he also says this on a larger scale, collective. We are in a new age, and we need a new story. We need a story that will tell us who we are at this time in history, that includes all the new things we have learned, that tries to be more complete and doesn't leave anybody out. The old stories from the last age can't tell us what we are supposed to be doing now, nor what our purpose is. Very well said. Thank you for that article. All right, well, what lies beyond our stories? I have questions for you around this, for all of us, especially about the stories we tell ourselves, but also the ones we give voice to that support, encourage, and inspire us in small or large or other ways. So, why do you feel we need to create or continue telling stories to ourselves? For you, why? Is there one story you feel highly defines you, defines your life, or one that has been pivotal? Have you ever worn a story like a costume or a uniform? Maybe a suit of armor, maybe a disguise? Have you ever thought of how external stories are related to you, but not actually your identity, not your essence, not what defines your ultimate beingness? What if you aren't the stories themselves and are therefore free to create, to reinvent, and live any kind of narrative? Have you ever significantly changed a story you were telling yourself? And if so, why did you change it? And what was the result of that? Have you experimented, if not yet with separating yourself as distinct from your stories, with at least telling better feeling stories about yourself? When have you seen yourself in a new light? Left an old version of yourself behind? We know how powerful stories can be, ours, also other people's, and how caught up, maybe lost in the drama of some story or stories or plots or subplots, maybe right now. Maybe that's part of your experience right now. Or have you realized that some outer narrative may be seriously coloring or skewing your ability to be unbiased or truly discerning? How do you go about distinguishing between true and false narratives in these times of so much unclear, mis, or disinformation many of us are contending with? Have you tried just stepping away from, out of all narratives, all stories, even a little? You might try experimenting with doing that, even briefly, and see what you discover. Might be surprised. Or at least make up your own mind about someone or something, your own gut, without being subject to groupthink or conditioned ideas or judgments, or better yet, someone else's way of thinking about it. Was there any time that you realized your interpretation of things might have covered up a vital truth? Or that your own created or received stories about you tripped you up in some unserving way? Think about that. When were you last in a place of no mind, no thought, no stories running, just part of a moment, maybe alone, maybe in stillness, simply being present, in an unstorified state of aliveness and awareness and consciousness? And if you have been there or go there often, to this place of simply being, what is it like? How does it feel? Does it feel freer, more vital, more natural, unbound? Have you taken away your layers and labels, your roles, your beliefs, your social and cultural narratives, and asked yourself the question, who am I really? All right, on to what various listeners had to say in response to the questions, to some of them. All right, this is from a Connecticut shoreliner and Rhode Islander. This is from B. The clearest and truest story, my becoming. I will never arrive. What a relief. I experienced a great shift in my, quote, story one spring day in 2022. My son was coming to visit after a long stretch of time, and I was so excited. And even more excited because he was arriving by train. You see, I love trains, how they sound, what you see from the cars, how they seem to have untethered access to the countryside we often do not get to see when on foot or by car. As I waited for his arrival, thoughts of a mother-son relationship started to skip around in my head. After 30 years of witnessing him, I knew there was a shift in my perception of our bond. The arriving train seemed to express the movement from what could be called a, quote, parental right to, quote, parental privilege. He was not mine, but his own. An end to one story and the alarming realization he was never mine to begin with, but simply put into my care for a time. And time had run its course. I wrote the following poem to capture the story shift. My son returns. Growth rings, seen clearly around and behind his eyes. Finding heart-sung lullaby, has gentled his manhood, cradles it deep, swings it wide in his belly, his perennial arrival, my privileged witness. Wood-end growth, expansion from rains, splintered, peeling bark, fluttering in this newborn season, strong places no longer in bass note labor. I memorized his baby breath, placing it in my supple heart womb for just these moments. So, I wait. No pacing hospital halls, nor gripping handrails. From the southwest, a train shriek, the wail shatters into brassy coins, minting a new layer of gold on bluing shoreline, his currency like glitter, spreading with marine air. Its metal body slithers, form and voice belting out a birthing duet, gliding in another key toward a platform, homeward. He comes. Not through me, but toward me now, this spring day. Thank you, babe. That's absolutely beautifully expressed. That was written April 3rd, 2022. Beautiful. Read that again sometime. From Paul in Cape May, New Jersey. Colin, as a storyteller yourself, you might be interested in this one. This defines my outlook on life, on how to accept graciously, something I rarely do. I always feel obligated to say no to a thank you for a job well done or even a payment from an act of kindness. So this is the story I tell myself and my grown daughters. This is called, quote, the story of the 2 nickels. My father and his brother were just lads in the 1930s. It was a hot summer day and the neighbor was cutting his grass. He asked the boys if they would help him and would give them a nickel each, which at the time was a lot of money. They agreed and used the push mower and cut his grass. After a couple of hours, they finished and his yard looked wonderful. The man was very pleased with the job and gave my father a nickel. My father said, "No, thank you. I'm just glad I could help." The man went to his brother and said, "Do you want a nickel?" He said, "Yes. And I'll take his since he doesn't want it." And the man gave his brother both nickels. Moral of the story. Accept graciously in life, and maybe you won't have to give your brother a nickel. Thank you, Paul, for sending that in. This is from Tony in New Jersey. As a writer of fiction, I conjure a wealth of fanciful alternatives, making something of the myth of myself in the process. Doing so bears the burden of a dubious distinction, as the memory of such things severs the season from its insolence to struggle home the heartache that presumes upon the world's way to weary more than merits in its place all the longing and the loss that is based on the bounty which thrives there. A quote you might find relevant by Thomas Merton from his Thoughts in Solitude. Your life is shaped by the end you live for. You are made in the image of what you desire. Thank you, Tony, for that. Thank you. Well, I was talking with a friend up in Maine about the concept of self-perception, questioning whether our stories and narratives truly define our identity. He suggested that while self-reflection and writing can provide insight into our true self, language alone can't fully capture it. This is Richard up in Maine. One of 3 Richards I know in Maine, actually in the same area. How about that? We hear some of his words. Self-perception is not something you really share with even someone close to you, because they see you from another angle. There are people who write about it, who write about things that are normally unspoken. But generally speaking, the average person perceives, no matter who they are, perceives themselves. This self-perception, you're a writer and you choose to talk about that, but that's something most people rarely do. Thank you, Richard. Here's Annie Dillard from her book, The Writing Life. So funny, last night I was just had some books I had. They were another part of the house, and I said, I haven't seen these in a while. And I opened two of them. It just so happened they opened exactly to these places, which were so fitting for, I like that, I call it bibliomancy, serendipity of these particular passages. The written word is weak. Many people prefer life to it. Life gets your blood going, and it smells good. Writing is mere writing. Literature is mere. It appeals only to the subtlest senses, the imagination's vision and the imagination's hearing, and the moral sense and the intellect. This writing that you do, that so thrills you, that so rocks and exhilarates you, as if you were dancing next to the band, is barely audible to anyone else. The reader's ear must adjust down from loud life to the subtle, imaginary sounds of the written word. An ordinary reader picking up a book can't yet hear a thing. It will take half an hour to pick up the writing's modulations, its ups and downs and louds and softs. Love that, Annie Dillard. Thank you. Peter Everwine has this poem, A Story Can Change Your Life. On the morning she became a young widow, my grandmother, startled by a sudden shadow, looked up from her work to see a hawk turn her prized rooster into a cloud of feathers. That same moment, halfway around the world in a Minnesota mine, her husband died, buried under a ton of rockfall. She told me this story 60 years ago. I don't know if it's true, but it ought to be. She was a hard old woman, and though she knelt on Sundays when the acolyte's silver bell announced the moment of Christ's miracle, it was the darker mysteries she lived by. Shiver cry of an owl, black dog by the roadside, a tapping at the door and nobody there. The moral of the story was plain enough. Miracles become a burden and require a priest to explain them. With signs, you only need to keep your wits about you and place your trust in a shadow world that lets you know hard luck and grief are coming your way, and for that, so the story goes, any day will do. Thank you, Peter Everwine. Something else I came across just a few days ago, it was from a podcast on self-revealing, very short podcast, by Cliff High, C-L-I-F, High. And I like what he trenchantly, he's a trenchant thinker, and I like what he observes about consciousness. If we were to look at things from a very, very, very large view, we can say that there is consciousness. Consciousness expresses out of itself the universe and everything that's in it, including the materium, and he means the material world, and including all the energy and everything. It all comes from consciousness. If we were to think of this as a sort of technology, then we as individuals, our consciousness that has been encapsulated and attached to flesh, are extremely sophisticated, highly complex. We are energy beings, and we need to approach ourselves from that perspective in order to be healthy. We are not glommed together bits of matter that then, because there was enough matter together in the right fashion, became conscious. It is consciousness being put into the matter. Consciousness exists independent of it. So if we think of it this way, then we as individuals are a self-exploring, self-modifying, self-revealing, and self-instructing technology. And this is what meditation and all that is about. You are actually modifying the technology of consciousness within you. Thank you, Cliff High, for that. All right, well, let's pause quietly for just a few moments with this. Pause. Breathe. Behold where you are, wherever you are. See all the life flowing around you. Feel all the life flowing inside you. Breathe. Pause. To just be with yourself. Be at ease with yourself. be held simply by your body, gently by your heart, freely by the light and the air and the pure ground of the earth. Breathe here for a while with everything. From Psychology Today, the stories we tell ourselves, we create narratives to move us into and through the moments of life. It's by Thomas Hendricks, Ph.D. We humans are storytellers. Indeed, that proclivity is a distinguishing feature of our species. Most animals communicate only about things that are happening in the present, in settings bounded by the range of their senses. People use vocal commands more expansively. Using systems of arbitrary learned symbols, we talk about occurrences from the past and future, as well as from the present. Throughout history, people customarily have told stories to one another in public, often face-to-face encounters. Our modern world has extended this through culturally mediated forms, letters, books, newspapers, magazines, movies, TV, computers, and the sort. In such ways, story-making becomes mass-produced, distributed, and consumed. As important as these developments may be, individual persons continue to be critically important dispensers of information, especially about matters that affect their circle of social contacts. And he goes on later to say, do we always tell the truth? Most of us know people who lie blatantly, often in attempts at self-aggrandizement. The rest of us, I believe, quote, spin our tales like a good public relations agent whose client is ourselves. Better to offer quasi-truths about our doings or just to omit certain details than to be caught prevaricating. None of us wants to be seen as the villain of our own or of other people's lives. Quite the opposite. We want to be regarded well. The stories we tell are attempts to maintain that respect. Perhaps the truer audience of our pleading is ourselves. Our stories, strategically produced, give us confidence that we are doing the right thing. They restore belief that the life choices we have made are proper ones. They grant continuity to life's fitful challenges. They help us stay clear-minded about our commitments, and they ready us for the important changes that move us from one identity to the next. Joshua Edwards, The Story. I read the same book over and over, as much to have a familiar thing to hold as to forget how far I am from everything I know. Some people like their reading and their lives complex, but I prefer the pleasure of words not so unlike those in my throat. And for me, the perfect book tells this story. Someone travels for many years, then returns to a home that no longer exists. Thank you, Joshua Edwards, from his collection Castles and Islands. How about this by Leo Babauta, B-A-B-A-U-T-A, Mental Badassery, Becoming Aware of the Stories We Tell Ourselves. Let's give you a little snippet or two from that. Throughout the day, you're telling yourself stories about what's going on, about how wrong other people are to do what they do, about how good or bad you are at things. My challenge to you is to start to notice what you're telling yourself about everything. Notice these throughout the day. When we get hooked on a story, it's hard to break away from it, but becoming aware of being hooked is the most important step. So what can we do if we're hooked on a story? The first thing you can do is regard it as a dream. Not that it's false, just means it's not solid. It's not so solid. It's something you're playing out in your head, just like a dream, with very real emotional results. The next thing you can do is not act out the story. But don't act. Just stay with your awareness. There is another way of being, where you don't cling to the stories, but instead drop below them and are just aware of the moment as it is, without interpretations, judgments, preconceptions. Stories will still come up, but you can notice them and not get caught up in them. Thank you, Leo Babauta. And one last piece is about false narratives. This is from shortform.com. When your brain misinterprets sensory data. Are your emotions accurately informed? Are you viewing reality through the faulty lens of a false narrative? Well, clinical psychologist Susan David explains this, that people instinctively believe these narratives, even false ones, are true because they're informed by emotions which we're wired to pay attention to. Although human emotions act as a survival mechanism, the same neurochemical system can backfire, allowing your emotions to control you in a physical way. False narratives don't help you. Research suggests that the reverse may also be true. A negative emotional state can alter or impair your visual perception. This can become a feedback loop. Narratives deliver information through an internal stream of consciousness that constantly fills your mind with thoughts, associated memories, and emotions. When you reflect on these, this inner voice also drives you to judge yourself through the lens of your narratives. And David says these self-judgments create emotions of inadequacy and frustration. The Stories We Tell Ourselves, a book by R. Scott Gornto, offers a simple technique to see the bigger picture and judge the accuracy of your narratives. After you make a narrative-driven assumption, compare it to the real-life outcome. If your narrative says you'll never succeed at work, acknowledging your successes proves this to be an irrational narrative you shouldn't listen to. The Story of Ferdinand the Bull by Matt Mason. Dad would come home after too long at work, and I'd sit on his lap to hear the story of Ferdinand the Bull. Every night, me handing him the red book until I knew every word, couldn't read. Just recite along with drawings of a gentle bull, frustrated matadors, the all-important bee, and flowers. Flowers in meadows and flowers thrown by the Spanish ladies. It's lesson, really, about not being what you're born into, but what you're born to be, even if that means not caring about the capes they wave in your face or the spears they cut into your shoulders. And Dad, wonderful Dad, came home after too long at work and read to me the same story every night until I knew every word. Couldn't read, just recite. Thank you, Matt Mason, from his collection, The Baby That Ate Cincinnati. How about that for a title? He's new to me. And that poem. Stuart Dybek, T-Y-B-E-K, their story. They were nearing the end of their story. The fire was dying, like the fire in the story. Each page turned, was torn, and fed to flames, until word by word the book burned down to an unmade bed of ash. Wet kindling from an orchard of wooden spoons, snow stewing, same old wind on the gramophone, same old wounds. Turn up the blue dial under the kettle until darkness boils with fables and mirrors defrost to the quick before fogging with steam, and dreams rattle their armor of stovepipes and ladles. Boots in the corner kick in their sleep. A jacket hangs from a question mark. Like that. Thank you, Stuart Dybek. This is a poem from February of this year, from right here in Rhode Island. This was written for my goddaughter Axel on her 26th birthday, but I think apropos for all of us. And this theme that we're talking about, exhale, for my goddaughter Axel Shabe. Each time you breathe in the earth's air, the life-giving air, you breathe out a cocktail of nitrogen, oxygen, argon, carbon dioxide, but also, and more vitally, more profoundly, the exhalation of your prana, of your animated and animating spirit, a rush of aliveness that joins the great wind of all outspiriting breaths, the ether elixir of every living thing, every other being, that joins and streams its essence, invisible presence, through the world. Exhale. Well, I wanted to read you a piece, but I'm going to save it for another time. It's just to keep us in good time. It's by Mark Nepo from his splendid book, Drinking from the River of Light. And this particular passage, or 2 pages, is called Placeholders. You might want to look that up. Might be out there somewhere. Well, yes, we can. We've spoken about this. Begin anew at any time. A new version of our story, of ourselves, new expression, reinvention, reincarnation. I think of life as a different series of incarnations, earthly incarnations, reincarnations of a kind. This is from October of last year, from here in Rhode Island. It was written from my friend Anne Fifield in Brooklyn. Annie, get your pen and write for us the story of your life, not the one you lived before now, Scribe instead the one you're dreaming into today, as you desire it to be, as you see it becoming. Feel it miraculously unfolding, as the butterfly of your beautiful being emerges newly into all its possibility of new light, next flight. You may know this next piece by Max Ehrmann, Ehrmann, now relatively famous, I would say. I hadn't read it since maybe college, or at least maybe 20 years back. No matter the arc of our lives and stories about them, I would say consider his wise guidance, no matter what yours is. Desiderata. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexatious to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially do not feign affection, neither be cynical about love. For in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune. But do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be, and whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. Strive to be happy. Thank you, Max Ehrmann, Desiderata. And shall we, friends, do just this? Not necessarily, strive, but invite and allow it in. Yeah. All right, well, now coming into our last musings and sharings for this time together, for this week. A little water. A little froggy here and there tonight. If you had to close the book of your life, prepare for an otherworldly fuga mundi. Ready or not, here you go, forevermore. What would the last page, the end note, grace note be? The luminous face or close embrace of a great love? A simple, blissful childhood reverie? The first crisp taste of autumn at the green end of summer? And what table of its contents would you expose, to mark out the main chapters, the major chords, depth and breadth between birth and death, of your living and loving, your seeking and discovering? If you knew, you had to close the book. Jennifer Hecht, the story of my life. Each day goes down in history, wets its feet, bathes in the clear or murky stream, drinks deep, comes out to join past days on the other bank. We go in with the bathing day every morning, brace the shiver on our skin, taste the slaking of thirst, find footing on mossy rock, climb out with sleep. Waking, we're back on the first bank, wading with a new day into the kaleidoscopic water, Days far from either bank are barely seen and seem unseeing. There is no recording of them that knows the cold and quenching of their moment in the water. Yet I cannot let them go, nor bear the strong suggestion formed by their fading figures that they have let us go, and that those coming cannot be foretold anything actual of water, flesh, or stone. Publisher holds out a large envelope, says, "Sorry we can't publish your autobiography." Man sighs, says, "Story of my life." All these words, then, are only for the stream? The stream is everything? The stream is not enough? The specters on the banks are deaf, but listening? Thank you, Jennifer Hecht. From Quanaketag Beach, Weekapaug, Rhode Island, June 2021, a man by the open sea, open sky, with an open heart, an open book of life's pages yet to be written, yet to be read. James Galvin, The Story of the End of the Story, from his collection Resurrection Update. To keep from ending, the story does everything it can, careful not to overvalue perfection or undervalue perfect chance, as I am careful not to do in telling. By now a lot has happened, bridges under the water, no timeouts, sinewy voices from under the earth braiding and going straight up in a faint line. I modify to simplify, complicate to clarify. If you want to know your faults, marry. If you want to know your virtues, die. Then the heroine, who resembles you in certain particulars, precipitates the suicide of the author, wretchedly obscure, of that slim but turgid volume, by letting slip. Real events don't have endings. Only the stories about them do. Thank you, James Galvin. Next to last, this was on the Puget Sound, Port Townsend, Washington, September 2017. It goes on. When we've gone out with the tide, it goes on. The cool morning curtain of fog that lifts to sun and warmth. The lazy clang of the channel buoy. The fish and fishermen, sailors and ferry boats going about their business and pleasure. They go on. It all goes on. And last for now, dear friends, till we're together again over these airwaves, over these story waves. Blink. You open your eyes. Just born. You're here. Newly arrived. Wildly, preciously alive. A bright body of energy, feeling, all possibility. A fresh canvas. Blink. You open your eyes, just awake. You're still here, newly arrived, alive decades later. A bigger body of energy, feeling, possibility now. A wondrous work in progress. Blink. Each moment is your moment to enter, open to, be wildly alive in. Bring all your energy, feeling, possibility to the heart and art of your here-ness and nowness. Thank you again, friends, for leaning in here, for thinking and feeling in, for sharing this journey, these weavings of stories and reflections on our personal and collective storytelling. I'd welcome hearing your experience of the show, on the stories we tell ourselves, or how others you've taken in here along the way have touched you. And I invite you to freely share this one out or the whole floating poetry playlist. If you appreciated this broadcast, I'd welcome any contribution you might like to make. All donations I receive directly support my work on these programs that I shape to illuminate you and others. If you are making a gift, you can do that by Venmo to Fivefold, Fivefold, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or you can simply mail a check to me to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891, or contribute through the Donate tab at my site, thepoetorialist.com. Is there a theme you'd like to see a future show on? Just let me know. Colin at thepoetosphere.com. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube, currently on the floating poetry playlist there. These broadcasts do come to you through the Poetosphere, the oasis of possibility that I'm guiding, that you can explore as a visitor or join as a subscriber. If you haven't already, I encourage you to at least see what it's about, see how it speaks to your outer and inner self, get a sense of our growing community as well, of possibilitarians. And to make joining all the more attractive, I've made month and year-long subscriptions available for the arriving springtime, as we mark spring now, as of yesterday. You can have a membership at just $114 a year instead of $190, or $14 monthly instead of $19. You'll see each code to use right on the site at the Join Us tab. Thepoetosphere.com. Yes, there's a wealth of things to sense into and discover. I hope you do. And, there's also a soon-to-be-published podcast that I did. I was interviewed for on creativity with the soulgoddess.com group in England. That'll be out March 28th. More on that another week or so. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in here soon again and savor as well the song of another spring. I know I will. Until then, dear listeners, may you ponder well the stories you've told yourself or have been telling, where they've served your well-being or to the contrary, and where you might step outside of them for a while or forever to make some remarkable new places and senses of self and life and reality possible. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.